My name is Brenda Miller. I'm 61 years old, and I've been widowed for 8 years. I live alone in a small house in the suburbs of Seattle, where the mornings are so quiet you can hear a sparrow tap its beak on the window. All my life I thought I'd endured every pain fate could throw at me: my husband's sudden death, the weary nights of overtime to raise 2 children, swallowing my tears so my kids would never see their mother weak. I thought that was enough. I thought family was the one place that could never betray me. But one March afternoon I opened the mailbox and found my son Daniel's wedding invitation. I trembled with happiness, thinking I would see my eldest son in his wedding suit, thinking I would hold his hand as he walked down the aisle. But when my eyes skimmed the guest list printed in black ink, my name was not on it. In the lower corner, there was only one cold line: Mom, we'll live stream it for you. In that moment, I didn't scream. I didn't break down. I only felt the ground split beneath my feet while I stood there stunned. And maybe, right then, a part of me died. I set the wedding invitation down on the table, my hand still trembling slightly. The cold words printed on it seemed to stick to my eyes. The more I tried to close them out, the deeper they imprinted. In that quiet moment, memories from many years ago rushed back like a film I couldn't stop. My husband, Michael, died when I was just past 50. A construction accident, sudden, brutal, and cold. That day, it was pouring in Seattle. The foreman called, his voice shaking. I remember gripping the receiver until the joints of my fingers went white. When they brought me to the hospital, Michael lay still on a stretcher, concrete dust still clinging to his face. I touched his calloused hand, and for the first time felt how ice-cold it was. My world collapsed in an instant. That day, I lost more than my husband. I lost the only wall that had shielded our small family from the storm. My 2 children, Daniel and Olivia, had just entered their 20s. They were too young to fully understand the emptiness I carried. But I knew one thing clearly: I did not have the right to fall apart. I remember the first evening after the funeral, when the house suddenly felt suffocatingly large. Olivia sat with her knees pulled up in the living room, eyes rimmed in red, whispering, "Mom, how are we going to live now?" I swallowed hard and held my daughter close. I had no answer, only a promise. "We'll be okay. Olivia, I'll take care of both of you." But I knew that promise meant I would trade away everything that was left of myself. I started working many extra hours at the small accounting firm where I had previously worked only half days. By day, I handled ledgers, calculated each invoice and every tax for clients. At night, I took on data entry, even typing reports for young lawyers fresh out of school. When the clock hit 2 or 3 a.m., I would still be hunched over the screen, my eyes burning, a cup of cold coffee between my lips. Sometimes Olivia would wake up for a drink and find me curled up in the kitchen amid towering piles of papers. She would pout, "Mom, go to sleep. You have work again tomorrow." I would just smile and smooth her hair. "I can sleep later, as long as you have the books you need for school tomorrow." I never told them I had once dreamed of studying business administration in college. When I was young, I had been accepted to the community college. But when Michael began work as a construction laborer and our income became unstable, I put it on hold. I told myself, I'll continue later. But after my husband died, that later never came. I poured all my energy into Daniel and Olivia. When Daniel wanted to go to college in California, I mortgaged the little house to come up with the dorm deposit. When Olivia dreamed of studying communications in Boston, I worked extra hours to pay her tuition. I remember seeing Olivia off at the airport with only Michael's old carry-on for her to take. I stood, watching her silhouette disappear beyond security, my heart both proud and aching. Those years, I wouldn't allow myself to stop. I worked through holidays, disregarding my age. Friends faded away. Christmases usually meant just me and a small store-bought cake. I wasn't sad. I thought that once my children were grown, I'd have another joy seeing them happy, seeing them spared the hardships I endured. Daniel once called me late one night after failing an interview for his first job post-graduation. His voice was choked. "I can't do it. Mom, maybe I'm not good enough." I sat on the bed, phone to my ear, watching the rain drum against the Seattle window. I answered gently, "Son, you don't know your father. Failed 3 interviews before he got a job. Being good doesn't mean never failing. Being good is knowing how to stand up after failure. You are my greatest pride." Those words comforted Daniel. But the truth underneath was different. I had immediately transferred $1,000 into his account so he wouldn't worry about rent that month. I had done that dozens of times whenever they were in trouble. Olivia was no exception. I remember the night she called me, sobbing after a breakup with a long-term boyfriend. I booked a plane to Boston and sat up all night on the couch in her small apartment, just to make tea, cook soup, and listen to her complaints. I became their shelter whenever they stumbled. But perhaps I had forgotten one thing: when a refuge is too easy to find, people take it for granted. I missed out on many things. I never bought the dress I once wanted. Never took the Alaska trip Michael and I had planned. I drove the same old Toyota for 14 years, patching it up every time it broke down. I thought, later. But later never arrived. Now, looking at the wedding invitation missing my name, I suddenly realized a painful truth. All those sacrifices seemed to have turned me into an invisible shadow. To Daniel, I was no longer his mother but a source of financial support. To Olivia, I was the shoulder she leaned on when she failed, but never the person she remembered when she succeeded. I closed my eyes as memories echoed the smiles, the sweat that had fallen because of my 2 children. This house had once been the home I built with my own hands. The place where Michael told me before he left, "Let our children always know they have somewhere to return." I had done exactly that. Only now, I did not expect that this place would become where I sit alone asking myself, where did I go wrong? Olivia, my daughter, chose a life in Boston many years ago. She rarely calls home. And whenever she does, it always revolves around one thing: money. Sometimes it's money for the deposit on a new apartment. Sometimes for an emergency dental bill. Other times, for another training course she insists will change her future. I never once said no. Each time I heard Olivia's choked-up voice on the other end of the line, I slipped right back into the familiar role, the mother who always reaches out, no matter the circumstances. But what truly broke my heart wasn't the money, it was the distance. After each transfer, the call ended abruptly. There was no, "How are you, Mom?" No, "Are you feeling well?" Just the cold clatter of keyboard keys from the bank confirming a successful transaction. I remember one Christmas when I called Olivia, simply wanting to hear her voice to ease the emptiness in my too quiet home. But when she picked up, her tone was hurried. "Mom, I'm at a party. It's loud. We'll talk later." "Okay. Oh, could you send me some money? I'm a little tight this month." Music thumped through the receiver before the call cut off. I sat there in silence with the small apple pie I had just pulled from the oven. The kitchen was rich with the smell of cinnamon, but there was no one left to share it with. If Olivia kept her distance, then Daniel, my eldest son, hurt me in a different way. Ever since his engagement to Brooke, everything has changed. Daniel used to be warm, calling on weekends to ask if I wanted to grab lunch or catch a basketball game together. But once Brooke entered the picture, those calls grew fewer and then disappeared. I still remember the first time I met Brooke. She walked into my home with a gentle smile and a bouquet of white roses in her hand. "Mrs. Nextdock, Miller, it's such a pleasure to meet you." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes darted quickly around the living room as if she were appraising merchandise. I felt uneasy, but told myself I was being suspicious. I tried to be welcoming, chatted with her, prepared a thoughtful dinner. But that very evening, as I reminisced about Daniel's childhood, Brooke interrupted. I think Daniel should focus on building a more professional image now. The past is best left as just memories. Don't you agree? I froze. The words might have sounded harmless, but the way she smiled softly and laid her hand on Daniel's arm told me everything from that moment on. Someone else would take my place in my son's story. In the months that followed, every wedding plan was dictated by Brooke and her family. I wasn't asked about the venue, nor invited to help choose the dress or flowers. When I suggested a small church in the city, the same one where Michael and I were married, Brooke smiled politely. Oh, that's sweet. But that style, it's a little too old-fashioned for our family's taste. We think Napa Valley would be a better fit. Daniel sat beside her, nodding silently. A sharp ache pierced my chest, but I held it in. Another time, I offered to put together a photo album of Daniel's childhood as a surprise gift for the wedding. Brooke immediately dismissed the idea. That's nice. But my family already hired a high-end media company for that. We want everything to look consistent and more elegant. I heard the emphasis on elegant. The implication was clear. I, with my small suburban home and my yellowed old photos, didn't belong in their world. That's when I slowly realized I was no longer the groom's mother, but just a shadow standing outside their bright circle. Brooke was skillful, always polite. Yet every word, every gesture was another quiet cut, trimming me out of Daniel's life. And the most painful part was that Daniel allowed it to happen. One late night, I called my son. My voice trembled. Daniel, don't you think I should be more involved, at least in your wedding? Silence stretched on the other end. Then Daniel's voice. Flat, Mom. I know you care. But Brooke and her family have their own way of doing things. You might not fit with that style. Not fit. Just 2 words. But they sliced straight through my heart. I sat frozen in the dark, the phone slipping into my cold palm. I used to believe that after all the struggles of raising children, there would come a day when they'd understand. A day when they'd remember. But now, hearing my son say that I didn't fit, I finally understood the distance wasn't just the miles between Seattle and Napa Valley, it was the distance in a heart that had long since drifted away from me. And then, just a few weeks later, I was dealt an even harsher blow. One morning, as I pulled the mail from the box in front of my house, I found a thick envelope stamped with the logo of a law firm in Seattle. I thought it might be tax papers, or maybe something related to health insurance. But when I tore it open, my vision blurred. It was a copy of the sales contract for the Lakewood cabin, the little wooden house by the lake that Michael had left to me. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding. There, clear as day, was Daniel's signature. My name was nowhere to be found. Not a single line showed my consent. The buyer, a trust named Carter Family Trust. I knew well enough that Carter was Brooke's last name. I sank into a chair, the papers slipping through my hands and scattering across the floor. Suddenly, images of Michael smiling in the late afternoon sun by the lake, holding his old fishing rod while the children ran and laughed around him, flooded back and blurred my eyes with tears. The Lakewood cabin wasn't just a house. It was a memory of love. The place where Michael had laid each wooden board with his own hands. The place where he once whispered to me, Brenda, I want you to have a place that belongs only to us. When the world gets too loud, you can come here and feel at peace. My hands trembling, I picked up the phone and called Daniel. He answered after a few rings. His voice hurried. Mom, I'm busy. What is it? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Did you sell the Lakewood cabin? There was silence for a few seconds. Then Daniel exhaled sharply. Yes, I did. Mom, it's just a house. Brooke and her family are in trouble. They need money urgently to keep their company. I couldn't just stand by. I went numb. Just a house, Daniel. That's your father's legacy to me. That's where we used to. Daniel cut me off. His voice dry. Mom, I know you feel attached to it, but we have to be realistic. Brooke is my fiancée. Her family is my future. They needed help. And I did what I had to do. I choked back tears. And what about me? Did you ever think about your mother? On the other end? Daniel stayed silent. Then he said a sentence that froze me to my core. Mom, don't make this so dramatic. We're talking about property, not a life. I trembled with anger. To you, maybe it's just property. But to me, it's the last place where I could still feel Michael's presence. You sold it, without even asking me. I heard Daniel sigh heavily. Mom, I don't want to argue. The decision has been made. I thought you would understand. I hung up, my hand still shaking. In the silent house, it felt as if a part of my heart had been cut away. I stood up and took the old key to the Lakewood cabin, still hanging on the wooden hook in the kitchen. The metal was a little rusted, but it glinted faintly under the warm light. I clenched it in my fist, and the tears came streaming down. I remembered those summers when Daniel was little, clinging to my leg, begging Mom, let me swim in the lake just a little longer. And Olivia, our hair tangled, face smeared with marshmallow, laughing by the fire. Michael looked at me then, his eyes warm, and said, see, Brenda, everything that truly matters in this world is right here. Now, it was all gone. That night, I drove out to Lakewood. The sky was dark, the wind whispering through the pine trees. I parked by the roadside, staring at the house that now belonged to someone else. The door was locked, the porch cold and empty. I stood there for a long time, half expecting Michael to step out, smiling, or the children's laughter to echo across the yard. But there was only the wind. I drove home with a heavy heart. For the first time in my life, I understood that not every sacrifice is repaid with love. Some sacrifices only make people forget their true worth. And the deepest pain of all is when the very child you raised is the one who tramples over those precious memories. The days that followed, I lived like a shadow. By day, I still went to the office, still smiled and greeted my colleagues. But inside I was hollow. At night, I sat in the quiet kitchen, spreading the contract papers across the table. The warm light casting cold letters onto the pages. I read them again and again, unable to accept that Daniel, the son I had once trusted, absolutely could sign away the Lakewood cabin without my signature. Something pushed me to dig deeper. I called the law firm named on the contract, pretending to want to confirm a few details. The secretary on the line, after checking the file, replied confidently, yes, the sale is complete. We have a power of attorney authorizing your son, Mr. Daniel Miller. I froze. I had never signed any power of attorney. My voice went hoarse. Could you send me a copy of that power of attorney? They agreed. Just a few hours later, I received an email with the attachment. When I opened it, my chest felt as if someone had squeezed it. The paper bore a full signature, my name, and a notarization stamp. But looking closely, I realized the handwriting was not mine. The name Brenda was written more neatly. An intentional imitation, but missing the tremor my hand shows when I sign. I sat in silence for hours, the copy statement in my hands. My hands were cold. But inside, a smoldering flame began to rise. Daniel and Brooke had forged my signature. They had staged an entire scheme to take the house. I did not scream or smash things. I quietly opened a drawer and gathered all the related documents, the original deed to the Lakewood cabin, Michael's will, the bank transaction emails, the newly printed contract. I put everything into a brown cardboard folder, sealed it, and placed it in a locked cabinet. That night, I barely slept. I sat by the window, watching Seattle's rain fall steady against the glass. In my mind replayed the image of little Daniel standing on the yard, clutching my hand. Mom, don't leave me. Please. And now, he had left me, even forging his mother's signature to get money for another family. The next day, I went to the bank. The branch manager, Mr. Peterson, who had known me for years, was surprised when I asked to print all recent transactions on Daniel's account. I didn't explain. I only said I needed to reconcile some items. When I looked at the long printout, my eyes stopped at one number: $200,000 transferred to an account belonging to the Carter Family Trust. Just as I had suspected, I sat down, clutching my coffee, my mouth bitter. So the Lakewood cabin hadn't merely been sold, that sum had gone straight to Brooks' family. They were in debt. They needed to save their company. And my son had not hesitated to sacrifice the last keepsake of his father. That evening I called Daniel. My voice oddly calm. Daniel, I want to see you. Let's talk in person. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown. When Daniel walked in, dressed in a neat suit, I suddenly remembered the boy who used to hug his teddy bear while waiting for me to finish the night shift. I looked at him, my heart sinking. But then his cold gaze reminded me he was no longer that child. I set the folder on the table. Explain this to me. Daniel's face changed when he saw the copy of the power of attorney. He picked it up, glanced quickly, then put it down with a sigh. Mom, Brooke and I just wanted to make things simpler. If we'd asked you, you would have objected. I looked him straight in the eye. So you chose to forge my signature. Do you know that's illegal? Daniel avoided my gaze and mumbled, I had no other choice. My chest tightened. I said softly, each word heavy on the table, there is always a choice. Daniel. And you chose to betray me. He fell silent, his face flickering with shame before hardening again. I sat there, feeling as if an unbreakable wall had risen between us. That night I went home holding the folder to my chest. I did not know what I would do with it all. But I knew one thing from now on. I would no longer be the patient, quietly sacrificing mother. The truth had been exposed, and it was too clear for me to pretend otherwise. I sat in the familiar kitchen, the yellow light spilling across the scratched wooden table, worn down by years. In front of me was a glass of untouched red wine. Papers stacked high. The wall clock ticked, ticked, each sound echoing like my own pounding heartbeat. In that moment, I suddenly thought of Michael's small wooden box, the one I had kept for 8 years but rarely dared to open. The box was tucked away in the bedroom cabinet, covered by a thin layer of dust. I carefully carried it to the kitchen table. The old box, its corners chipped, felt as though it held the very soul of the man who had once been my only shoulder to lean on. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside were the familiar things, a pocket watch that no longer ticked, a few photos we had taken by Lakewood, and at the very bottom, a pale yellow envelope I had never opened. On the corner of the envelope, in Michael's strong, familiar handwriting, were the words, "If they ever forget who you are, this will remind you." I ran my fingers across the faded blue ink, my eyes blurred with tears. When had Michael written these lines for me? Had he known there would come a day when the very people I loved most would forget me? I sat still for a long time before slowly tearing the envelope open. Inside was not a love letter, nor a few old photographs. It was a thick packet of papers, neatly bound, with bold letters on top: share certificate, Pacific Northwest Construction Company. I was stunned. Michael had once mentioned investing in an old friend's construction company, but he never spoke of it again. I always thought it was just a small investment, nothing significant. But the numbers on the certificate made me gasp. The total current value was over $2 million. My hands trembled as I set the papers down on the table. My heart tangled with emotions. My whole life I had lived frugally, every paycheck from accounting calculated to the last cent. Every new pair of shoes debated for months. And yet, here, in this old apartment, all these years, I had been holding on to a fortune without knowing it. A voice inside me whispered, "Brenda, this is what Michael wanted." He knew there would be a day when you would need to be reminded you are not small. You are not just a shadow. I held the papers, tears splattering onto the stark numbers. The feeling was both painful and empowering. I whispered, "Michael, you thought of me even to this very day." I pictured him sitting beside me, smiling gently, the way he always did when he wanted to ease my worries. He had left me not only wealth, but a message. If they forget who you are, remind them. That night, I did not sleep. I pulled out paper and pen, writing down every thought, every step I would take next. In the past, I could remain silent, endure, give until I was empty. But now, with what Michael had left me, I knew I had a choice. I closed the wooden box and laid my hand on it once more, as though holding my late husband's hand. The fire in me was no longer only fury. It had become something else, a blazing determination, clear, bright, and impossible to extinguish. The next morning, I called Daniel. My voice was steady, but every word felt like it was nailed into place. "Son, I want to see you. In person. Not on the phone. Not through messages." Daniel hesitated, then agreed. We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown in Seattle. A place I knew for certain Brooke or anyone from her family would not be present. When Daniel walked in, he wore a white shirt. His tie loosened, as if he had just left the office. His eyes shifted away when he saw me. I was ready. The folder set in front of me. "Explain this." "Daniel." "What is it?" I pushed the forged power of attorney toward him. Daniel picked it up, his eyes flickering but not surprised. He set the paper down, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Mom, why dig into this? It's already done." I kept my voice calm. "You used a forged signature of mine to sell the Lakewood cabin. That's not only wrong, it's illegal." Daniel leaned back in his chair, sighed, his voice low. "Mom, I don't want to argue. I did it to save Brooke's family. Their company was about to collapse. Debts piling high. I couldn't stand by and watch my fiancée and her parents lose everything." I looked straight into my son's eyes. "And what about me? Did you ever think about me? The Lakewood cabin wasn't just a house. It was your father's legacy. You betrayed my trust. And you betrayed this family's memory." Daniel frowned, his voice rising sharply. "Mom, you're always talking about Dad. About the past. About your sacrifices. Do you ever think about me? I'm building my own life. Brooke is my new family. And I have a responsibility to them." I felt my heart shattering piece by piece. But I refused to let the tears fall. A new family. If your new family is built on lies and betrayal, it will never last. You may call it happiness, but to me, it's only an illusion. Daniel's face flushed, his voice angrier now. "You're destroying my happiness. You don't understand what Brooke has been through. You don't know how much they need me." I let out a bitter laugh, though inside, my chest tightened. "Destroying happiness, Daniel. Any happiness built on betrayal will never endure. You can fool yourself, but the truth won't let you rest." That silenced Daniel. He lowered his head, turning his coffee cup in his hands. I saw the conflict in his eyes. But then he shook his head. "Avoiding me, you'll never understand," I answered softly, my voice low but resolute. "Maybe I don't understand all of your choices. But remember this, I spent my whole life building a foundation for you. And you, with one forged paper, destroyed it with your own hands. The cafe grew so heavy with silence that I could hear the spoon clinking against a cup at the next table. Daniel stood up, tossing one last line over his shoulder. If you really loved me, you'd leave this alone. I sat there, frozen, watching my son's figure walk away. Inside me was both a profound ache and a chilling clarity. I knew then that a mother's love cannot erase the truth. And sometimes, love doesn't mean unconditional forgiveness, it means facing the mistake head-on. Even when the one at fault is your own child. I gathered the folder, rose, and left the cafe. Outside, Seattle's wind carried an icy sting through my hair. But within me, a fire still burned. That fire was no longer a wild, directionless anger. It was a determination that I would not let Michael's memory, nor my own worth, be buried under the selfish schemes of others. Not even if they were my own flesh and blood. In the days that followed, the air in my house felt as heavy as if a storm were rolling in. My inbox kept chiming with new messages. The first was from Brooke. Her tone so sweet, it felt fake. Mrs. Miller. Surely there's been a misunderstanding. Daniel said you're still holding the funds meant to support the wedding. We urgently need them to finalize payments with the restaurant and hotel. Please transfer quickly, since everything has already been arranged. I read it and let out a faint laugh. A laugh both bitter and awakening. Behind that polite veneer was a command. A few hours later, another message appeared. This one short and blunt. If you want Daniel to keep his reputation, you'd better not disappoint my family. It was signed Mr. Carter, Brooke's father. My phone buzzed non-stop. A strange number called, the cold. A sharp voice of a woman, likely Brooke's mother, Mrs. Brenda. You should understand what matters most right now. We've invited guests, signed contracts. Daniel made promises to us. You can't let our family lose face like this. I listened quietly, then answered with one short line, I'm not your bank. I'm Daniel's mother. The line went silent, then cut off. That whole week, the pressure mounted. Emails from the event company, the restaurant, even acquaintances from Brooke's side, all circling the same demand money. Daniel didn't stay silent either. One late night, he came to my house, his face tense, his voice urgent. Mom, please, they're losing their minds. If we don't get that money, everything will collapse. I'll be humiliated. I looked at my son. For a fleeting moment, I saw the little boy who once cried after falling off his bike, begging me to scoop him into my arms. But standing before me was no longer that child. This was a grown man, letting himself be controlled by others' schemes. I asked slowly, Daniel, do you really think I should pay for other people's mistakes? I raised you and Olivia with sweat and tears. All these years, I never once refused. But this time, son, I will not. He glared. You don't understand. This isn't just about money. It's my honor. My family. I stood tall, facing him, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. If your honor only exists with my money, then it isn't honor. And if your family only stands when I keep paying the debts, then it isn't a real family. Daniel shook his head, frustrated, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I sat back down, my heart racing but my hands steady. Michael's words from the old envelope echoed in my mind. If they ever forget who you are, this will remind you. Now I understood. I was not a shadow. I was not an endless wallet. I was Brenda, Michael's wife. Daniel and Olivia's mother, and I deserved respect. The next day, Brooke's family sent someone to my door. A stranger. Apparently their lawyer, carrying a stack of papers. His voice was cold. Mrs. Miller, if you don't complete the transfer as agreed with Daniel, we will consider legal action. I met his eyes and placed the folder I had prepared on the table. Inside were copies of the forged power of attorney and all the transaction records. I spoke slowly. You can go back and tell them this, if anyone wants to drag me to court. I'm ready. But before you threaten me, remember, forging a signature and seizing assets is a crime. If this goes to court, no one can guarantee who will win. His face faltered. He hurriedly gathered his papers and left in haste. The house fell quiet again. I sat down, sipped the now cold tea, and listened to the rain falling on the porch. For the first time in years, I felt I was no longer the weaker one. I was no longer the woman who endured in silence. I had spoken the truth I needed to say. And I knew from here on out, the real storm was only just beginning. Daniel and Brooke's wedding day came faster than I expected. News of the lavish ceremony in Napa Valley had been circulating on social media for weeks. Pictures of the restaurant draped in white roses, the pricey wine list, the line of luxury cars from the Carter family, all of it posted as though to boast. Old friends occasionally sent me some of those glossy ads, asking why I wasn't bragging about my son's wedding. I only gave a faint smile and stayed silent. That morning, Seattle was draped in a light drizzle. I brewed a pot of oolong tea and set it on the table by the window. There was no suitcase packed, no plane ticket, no new dress. I sat there, letting the damp wind press against the glass, my heart strangely calm. Meanwhile, in Napa Valley, soft music drifted beneath the arch of flowers. Guests in elegant gowns and suits raised shimmering glasses of wine. Daniel wore a silver-gray suit. Brooke, a sparkling beaded gown. Walking into the ceremony with radiant smiles. Everything seemed flawless. But then, in the middle of the reception, just as the appetizers were being served, a restaurant manager hurried over to Brooke's parents. His voice was low, urgent, but loud enough for nearby guests to hear Mr. and Mrs. Carter. We just received notice from the bank. The primary deposit has been frozen. They reported signs of signature fraud in the transaction records. If the balance isn't paid immediately, we'll be forced to stop service. Whispers spread through the hall like fire to dry grass. Brooke's father flushed red, hissing sharply but still loud enough. What impossible? This is a mistake. Call the lawyer right now. Her mother trembled, turning to her daughter Brooke. What is happening? Daniel said. Everything was already taken care of. Daniel's face turned pale as he frantically pulled out his phone, dialing over and over. I could picture him stepping into the hallway, his voice breaking. No, this can't be. Mom, what did you do? Did you call the bank? I wasn't there. But I could see the chaos unfolding as if it were right in front of me. Guests began leaving as the staff quietly removed the dishes. Some murmured in hushed voices, "The Carter family is drowning in debt." I heard, "What a disgrace. Throwing a grand wedding and not being able to pay." Each whisper was a knife cutting into the Carters' pride and Daniel's. Back in Seattle, I sat in my small kitchen, hands wrapped around a warm teacup, staring through the misted window. The steam rose with a delicate fragrance, reminding me of peaceful mornings with Michael at the Lakewood cabin. I closed my eyes. Not with anger anymore, but with clarity. I had stood my ground. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to be in Napa Valley to see it. The truth had revealed itself on the very day they most wanted to shine. I imagined Daniel returning to the reception, forcing a smile, though his hands trembled. Brooke, perhaps in tears, her makeup streaked, desperately clinging to attention, and her parents, heads held high in despair, trying to quell the storm of gossip but utterly powerless. More than 1,000 miles away, I sat quietly in my simple kitchen, my heart unburdened. My eyes turned to the window, where the Seattle rain fell steadily. In its rhythm, I heard Michael's whisper, "Brenda, you did the right thing." No one can take away your dignity unless you hand it over yourself. I smiled faintly and lifted the cup to my lips. In Napa Valley, the white roses may have withered in chaos. But in Seattle, beneath the rain, I had found something stronger than any extravagant wedding, the peace that comes from knowing exactly who I am. 2 days later, my doorbell rang. I thought it might be a deliveryman. Or worse, another member of Brooke's family coming to pressure me. But when I opened the door, I froze. Standing there was Olivia, my daughter. Her coat was drenched, her hair tangled from the rain and wind. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed as if she hadn't slept in days. The moment she saw me, Olivia pressed her lips tight, then suddenly burst into tears. "Mom," her voice shook, caught in her throat. "I'm sorry. I can't stay silent any longer." I hurried her inside, handed her a towel to dry her hair, poured a cup of hot tea into her hands. She sat in the armchair, trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks. Before I could even ask, she spilled everything like she'd been carrying a weight too heavy. "Mom, I've left you alone for too long. Not because I don't love you, not because I don't miss you, but because I was afraid." My chest tightened. Afraid of what? Olivia. She clenched her fists, staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Brooke. It was her. Do you know why I stopped calling? Why? Every time I spoke it was rushed before I hung up. Because Brooke, she threatened me. She said if I stayed close to you, she would make sure Daniel fell completely under the Carters' control. They would cut him off from you forever. I didn't know what to do. I went still. The air in the room thickened. I had never imagined my daughter had been carrying that kind of fear for years. "So, you chose silence?" I asked softly, though the weight of it pressed on me. Olivia broke down, sobbing hard. "I thought silence would keep some balance. I thought at least Daniel would still have you, even from a distance. But I was wrong. I left you to suffer alone. Mom, I'm so sorry." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I stepped closer, laying my hand on her shoulder. My heart ached, but the anger was gone. What I felt was compassion for a child who had lived too long in the shadow of fear. "Olivia, my daughter," I whispered. "I never stopped loving you. I just didn't understand why you kept your distance. Now I know. But listen to me. Love that survives only under threats is never real love. Brooke may control Daniel, but she cannot control the bond between a mother and her child." Olivia lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen. "Can you forgive me for all these years? For making you believe you'd been abandoned?" I pulled her into my arms, whispering into her rain-scented hair, "You never lost your place in my heart. Your biggest mistake wasn't silence, it was believing I couldn't understand. I forgive you, Olivia. Always." She sobbed in my arms like the little girl she once was. I stroked her back, my throat tight. It felt like loss and restoration all at once, as though a part of me I thought was gone had been returned. That night, Olivia slept in her old bed. I sat on the porch, listening to the rain patter against the roof, replaying her words. A harsh truth became clear. I wasn't the only victim of the Carters' power games. Olivia had been dragged in too, forced to turn away from her own mother. Watching the porch light glow through the rain, I remembered Michael's message. "If they ever forget who you are, this will remind you." Yes, I had remembered who I was. And now, Olivia was finding her way back too. The next morning, I woke to the sound of light footsteps in the kitchen. Olivia was there, fumbling with the coffee. The sight of my daughter wearing my old sweater, her hair tied back, her eyes still puffy from crying, softened me. I sat at the table and watched her smile faintly. "I made it a bit strong, but I think you'll like it," Olivia said, her voice hoarse. I took the cup, inhaled the familiar bitter aroma, then looked her straight in the eye. Speaking slowly, Olivia, I'm glad you're back. But there's something you must understand. Forgiveness doesn't mean I forget everything. And love doesn't mean I will keep letting others trample over me. She bit her lip and nodded slightly. I continued, a mother's love is not a credit card. Olivia, those who are sincere will stay. Those who only disrespect or take advantage, they walk away. I will no longer allow myself to live like a shadow. The kitchen fell quiet for a moment. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. But this time they shone with something brighter. No longer weighed down by fear. She whispered, Mom, I understand. I didn't come back to ask for money. And I'm not here to beg you to take the burden again. I just want to be near you. For a while. To find myself again. In Boston. I always felt lost. I miss home. I miss you waking me up on Sunday mornings. I was stunned. In all those years, this was the first time Olivia had spoken so plainly. I stepped forward and placed my hand on her shoulder. If you truly want to stay, this door is always open. But Olivia, you must stand on your own 2 feet. I will not carry all your mistakes anymore. That is the new boundary between us. Olivia nodded firmly, as if accepting a great challenge. She grasped my hand. Squeezing tightly, I agree. Just give me a chance to prove I'm still worthy of being your daughter. In that moment, I felt a thin fog lift between us. There were still wounds, but at least we had begun to rebuild from the truth. That day, Olivia moved back into her old room. I opened the closet and found a few things she'd left from college, a photo album, a few faded concert tickets. Olivia smiled and hugged each item, as though reclaiming a piece of her lost youth. That evening, the two of us ate a simple meal together, chicken soup and toasted bread. But it felt unusually warm. Olivia looked around the kitchen and said softly, You know, in Boston, I have everything: a job, friends, a nice rental. But I never felt as safe as I do here. Just hearing the rain on this porch makes me feel more at peace. I smiled. Peace, something I had been searching for all these years, had returned, at least in part, through my daughter's honest voice. Late that night, after Olivia fell asleep, I sat in the living room and wrote a few lines in my notebook. Forgiveness is not erasure, it is building a new boundary. And sometimes, that boundary is what preserves true family. I looked up at the ceiling and whispered to Michael, Do you see? She's come back. But this time, I won't let her lose her way from her mother again. In the days that followed, my small house in Seattle suddenly felt warmer. Olivia stayed, helping me clean, cook, even arranging to work remotely so she could look after me. Watching her move around the house filled me with a strange yet familiar feeling, as if a missing piece had finally fallen back into place. But outside, the storm hadn't settled. News of the ruined wedding in Napa Valley spread faster than anyone expected. A local paper ran the headline, $1 million wedding cut short over fraudulent payment. The article didn't name names, but everyone knew it was the Carter family. Photos of guests leaving, half-eaten banquet tables, and the bride crying in her white dress were already circulating across social media. Daniel called me many times, but I didn't answer. I knew what he wanted wasn't advice, it was an escape route. And this time, I was no longer the ladder for him to climb. One afternoon, Olivia walked into the living room with her iPad in hand. She asked softly, Mom, do you want to see it? The news about Daniel and Brooke. I shook my head. I don't need to. Knowing the truth has spoken is enough. Olivia sat beside me. Speaking slowly, they're drowning in debt. After the funds were frozen, Brooke's former investors all pulled out. They said they no longer trusted the family. The Carter Company is like a ship with a hole in the bottom. I sipped my tea, my eyes drifting to the garden. Outside, the lavender swayed gently in the breeze. I whispered, That's not my revenge. That's the inevitable consequence. Olivia turned to me, her voice unsteady. Daniel, how will he manage now? I stayed quiet for a while before answering. I don't know. But this time, he must take responsibility. I've given too much already. Now he has to learn what it means to pay the price. A few days later, Daniel appeared at my door. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, his suit wrinkled as if he had worn it for days. When I opened the door, he stammered, "Mom, can I come in?" I stood on the porch, not opening it wider. "Daniel, what do you want?" He lowered his head, his voice breaking. "I was wrong. I've lost everything. Brooke, she blamed it all on me. The Carters turned their backs too. I have no one left to cling to except you." Looking at my son, my heart wavered. The mother in me longed to embrace him. But reason reminded me that if I gave in again, the same cycle would repeat. I drew a deep breath and spoke slowly. "Daniel, I am still your mother. But you need to understand. A mother's love is not a wallet. I'm not a bank for you to withdraw from whenever you're in trouble. If you want to stay, you must learn to stand on your own 2 feet." Daniel looked up, his eyes brimming. He wanted to speak but stayed silent, turning away. His figure faded into the Seattle rain, leaving behind a heavy silence inside me. That night, Olivia sat with me. She held my hand, her voice trembling. "Mom, I'm afraid he'll fall apart." I squeezed her hand and shook my head gently. Sometimes people have to fall in order to learn how to stand. That's a lesson no one else can learn for them. I didn't take revenge on Daniel. I didn't call to scold him. Didn't release evidence to the public. I chose silence, letting the truth speak for itself. And I knew that silence was the harshest blow of all. Because every time Daniel faced the empty space where I once stood, he would realize there was no one left to shield him. And when he thought of the Lakewood cabin, thought of what had been lost, he would know that the price of betrayal is never cheap. After that, I no longer poured my energy into pain or anger. I began to learn to live differently, to live for myself. In the mornings, instead of spending hours checking my children's messages, I walked around the neighborhood, breathing in the lavender blooming in the neighbor's garden. I bought a new laptop, reopened the packet of share certificates Michael had left, and started contacting a reputable law firm in Seattle to explore reinvesting. The young lawyer, Jonathan, reviewed the files and smiled. "Mrs. Estate Miller, these shares are currently worth more than $2 million. If managed carefully, they could not only secure your financial safety, but also create a steady, long-term income." I sat in silence, and hearing that felt as if Michael were still watching over me, handing me a shield so I would never be hurt again. I didn't use the money to buy a luxury car or a mansion. Instead, I chose cautious investments and set aside a portion for a small scholarship fund in Michael's name to support construction students in difficult circumstances. I wanted his love and his dream to continue. Beyond investing, I began attending a women's support center in Seattle. The first time I went, I saw familiar faces, women like me, abandoned by family, living in silence, believing their worth was only in sacrificing for others. I told my story, not to complain, but so they could see that once we dare to say enough, we can find ourselves again. A young woman, holding a small child and crying, grabbed my hand and whispered, "You give me hope. Maybe I can stand up too." "Can't I?" I squeezed her hand and smiled. "Yes. It's never too late." In the evenings, while Olivia worked on her computer in the living room, I sat and wrote in my old journal. On the last page, I wrote, "I did not lose my children. I only lost an illusion. And finally, I found myself again." I closed the notebook, feeling light. After everything, I realized the most important thing is not clinging to what's broken, but learning to stand tall and look at myself in the mirror with pride. The message I want to leave for myself, for Olivia, and perhaps for anyone listening to this story, is this: sometimes the strongest way to love is not to sacrifice until you're empty, but to know how to say enough, to choose to respect yourself first. Only then do we truly know what freedom is. You know, as I finish this story, I still wonder, if it were you, what would you do? Would you keep silent to preserve the peace even while your heart bleeds? Or would you stand up, set boundaries, and say, enough? I deserve respect. Every family has cracks and silences that are hard to name. But sometimes, in the moment we think we've lost everything, we find the most precious thing of all: our dignity and our freedom. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you were in my situation, what would you choose? Share in the comments below. Your story might reach someone out there who needs to hear it. And if you want to keep coming along for more everyday stories filled with tears and resilience, please follow the channel. Each new story will open a window into family bonds, betrayal, and above all, how we find ourselves again after the storm. Because maybe, in a story tomorrow, you'll find your own heart.